Hello, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar, How to Automate Database Change Management for Platform Engineering. My name is Shay Mann, and I will be hosting you today. Let's go over a few housekeeping items before we go ahead and get started. So we encourage questions throughout the presentation. Please submit those via the Q&A tab, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. We will also be recording today's session, so you will receive the recording via email tomorrow. I'd love to introduce our speakers for today. So first we have Amy Smith. Amy is a professional services engineer at Liquibase and is dedicated to eradicating manual database deployments throughout the world. She envisions a future where no database is left out in the cold without a pipeline. She's worked in IT engineering and services role for almost 30 years across a broad range of industries. So welcome, Amy. And I'm also excited to introduce James. James Bennett is a technical sales engineer here at Liquibase and has almost 30 years experience in IT, including system administration, development, solutions architecture, and enterprise sales. James enjoys helping customers achieve that light bulb moment when they fully appreciate how Liquibase can help their organization bring DevOps to the database. So welcome, Amy. Welcome, James. We're so excited to hear about the conversation today. That's where we'll start is this platform engineering discussion. Then James will give us a demo so that we can see everything we're talking about in action. And then we'll end with that live Q&A to be able to answer any questions that you have from the presentation and the demo. All right. And with that, James, I will pass it over to you to get us started.
All right. Thanks, Shay. Welcome, everyone. Amy, when we're thinking about platform engineering, the term really started to appear, I think, in the 2010s when I was looking around doing some research for this, but it really only gained traction in the last few years, it seems. Can you tell us what is platform engineering for folks who might be new to the topic?
Sure, James. So platform engineering, it's a discipline of software engineering, and it involves designing and optimizing tool chains and workflows. You're creating a standardized platform for your developers. It also often refers to the building of a product, and that's called an IDP, and that stands for either internal developer platform, or sometimes you'll see it as internal developer portal. And you have users of this portal, and those are going to be your developers, your data engineers, your data scientists, your DBAs. So it's your internal users at your organization using this platform. And also a platform engineering group generally has basically a charter or a goal, and that's an overwhelming goal to improve the development lifecycle by enhancing productivity, scalability, security. You're going to hear a lot about feedback loops between your platform team and your internal end users. And that's because there's this constant effort to optimize the platform. And the overall goal is you're supposed to be making your lives easier for your developers.
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, and happy developers are probably more productive developers. In fact, I think I was reading that up to happier employees are up to 20% more productive than their unhappy counterparts, I think. So great answer. Thanks, Amy. And I think we've got a poll now just to kind of set the mood here and see where everybody's at with their platform engineering journey. So our first poll question here is, does your organization have a platform engineering or a DevOps team? So you can say we've got both, neither, platform engineering only, or perhaps you just got DevOps only. So it looks like we're getting some really good responses here. So far, both and DevOps team are running nearly neck and neck here with both slightly edging out, I think. We'll give it just a couple more seconds here to see if there's any final respondents who'd like to chime in. Okay, that seems like a good mix. So, Amy, what do you think about the results here?
So it looks like both is the winner. And so that's good. I think, there's a statistic that within 10 years, 80% of organizations will have a platform engineering team, probably for larger organizations. But, so that's great that most of the people on this call, or a lot of the people on this call, are already doing it. So
Yeah, yeah, it looks good. Looks good. Okay. Let's move on then. So, it sounds a little bit like there's some overlap maybe between platform engineering and DevOps. And I know when I was first looking at this topic, it was a little confusing to me. So maybe you could help us understand, what are the kind of the differences or the similarities even between DevOps and platform engineering?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different terminology out there. Some promoters of the industry are going to call platform engineering an entire revolution of the DevOps industry. I think more commonly, you'll read that it's more of an evolution of the DevOps industry. I think to pit, DevOps versus platform engineering, I don't think that's correct. Um, here at Liquibase, our VP of product, Lorelei Catapan, her expression is that, platform engineering is what makes DevOps a reality. So to me, I think that means, DevOps is this set of practices through the years that have been used to, build reliable and secure software. You put platform engineering with that, and that's this building of this IDP we talked about, and, making it scalable, making it standardized, creating a collaborative, environment between your devs and your platform team. Ideally, if you're building a platform, you have a platform, a product manager. So this person is working with the different groups and pulling out all the requirements that are needed and gathering those from the end users. The automation space that we have today is so vast. There's all these components out there for, DevOps, infrastructure as code, CI/CD, then you have the cloud services, you have, all this complexity. And you add the database on top of that, and the big databases, and then AI now is all the rage. So, ideally your app developers can only focus on so much. And ideally you want them to be focusing on the innovation of their own product. Realistically, they can't focus on, all of the components and complexities of the platform and their own innovation. And so that's where, platform engineering can come in. You give your developers the self-service and the automation they need at their fingertips, but then that platform, you build in the guardrails into the system and you make it scalable. You're basically, I think a platform team is trying to abstract away some of the complexity of DevOps for your engineers.
Yeah, that sounds like quite a shift there from one to the other, and it seems like that integrated internal developer platform is really the kind of the linchpin for everything. Would you say?
I think so. That, you read about that is really the product that the platform engineering team is delivering. That's their, main goal.
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of moving forward then, what would you say are the key areas to consider regarding, adding database change management to an IDP? So, once you've got the basic IDP stood up, and of course we want to try and automate, as you say, as much as possible, and give the developers that self-service capability that they're looking for to make them happy. And oftentimes, databases are some of the last things to get moved, just because they're a little bit different, being a state-based system versus traditional app code. So, what would you say are the key things that people need to consider when they start bringing database change management into their IDP?
Yeah, for the database, security and compliance is always going to be your number one concern. That's your most protected asset. You have to make sure it's secure. You also have your data regulations, your PCI compliance, your HIPAA compliance. You have to take care of that first. I think second would be that developer happiness. So, doing that mindset shift where, this needs to be a pleasurable experience for your engineers. Try not to impose some of the tasks that they don't necessarily know about. Let them focus on their innovation. So I think that happiness is maybe second to security and compliance. And also, this tool should really save time for them. If you can reduce the context switching that a person has to do, if they don't want to worry about their, observability, that should just be built into the platform. And so that's it. If you can also do like standardization and scalability, so also other tasks that maybe developers don't want to have to worry about, if you can just give them a broad support especially for the database, supply a lot of different types of databases that they can use and have a consistent delivery process for them. I think that'll be successful. And then, so usually when you hear about platform engineering, you also hear about observability. So you really want to provide this way for developers to self-serve, monitor for errors, and then be able to use this data to make improvements and find out when things aren't working, either on the platform or for their particular applications. The last thing I think I'd say is communication. So, when you're bringing in a system like this or a platform, you really need to convince your executives on its importance, why it's important, why it's important to have your database inside your platform. So there's some convincing that needs to happen, and you need to be, publicize this to your higher executives and your internal developers. And for internal developers, you also need to educate them on how to use the platform. So there's some best practices you're going to want to put around the platform, why certain things are the way they are, things like that. So I'd say, those are probably the key things I'd focus on.
Yeah, I'm a terrible multitasker, and when you said context switching, I was reading something recently where it can take up to 25 minutes, I think, to once you're interrupted to kind of get back into the mindset where you were. So if we can kind of reduce that to a minimum, I think that will help people focus and as you say, save them time and make it a pleasurable experience. We're all about developer happiness on this webinar today. You also mentioned, convincing executives. I think that's really important too, to have that kind of executive sponsor. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm not sure how far you'll get without one. Like it has to be funded and the resources have to be there. So without that sponsorship, I think you're in for quite a haul.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, so I think we've got another poll just to keep it interactive here. So let's go ahead and bring this one up. So we'd like to know, what is your biggest hurdle to adopting platform engineering? We've got lack of prioritization, lack of developer support, lack of clear first steps, and or lack of ownership. It's too bad we can't have all of the above here, because I feel like that might be a reasonable answer as well. Yeah, so it looks like lack of prioritization and lack of clear first steps are battling each other for the top spot here, wouldn't you say?
It looks like it. Yeah, we'll see what it settles on here in a second.
Okay, there we go. So I think we've got our final results. Thank you, everyone who's participating. Really do appreciate that. And it can also help you understand kind of where you are in relation to your peers. So no one likes to be alone here. So yeah, it looks like lack of prioritization and lack of clear first steps are really the biggest hurdles right now. Okay.
And that lack of prioritization, I think that's where you maybe have that product manager come in. So you can put that responsibility on a person who's already used to dealing with priorities and things like that. So that is one. I think that the platform can help just by the definition and having that product manager of the platform.
And I think it helps with what you mentioned just a few moments ago about that executive sponsor. As you say, if you don't have an executive sponsor, you're probably not going to get very far. And I think these poll results kind of back that up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So kind of tying into that last question there, what are the biggest challenges that you've seen when bringing, database change management to a platform? Would love to have your insights on that.
Yeah. Just like the poll, priorities are probably the biggest challenges we see too in customer success. I mean, you really need that dedicated team to build out the platform, and that team needs to be funded and have the resources that they need. For the database, there's another group of individuals too that I think you need, and that's DBAs. You need their skill sets. There's just certain database components that you need some DBA individuals to make sure everything is secure and compliance is being followed. And then we actually in customer success have some projects kick off and they don't have the end users, they don't have the developers giving input at the beginning of the cycle. I think that's a problem too. There's sometimes this like build it and they will come mentality, but that's not really how platform engineering is supposed to be done. You're actually supposed to gather all that input. If you're building a product, you really need input from your users before you can just go off and build a product. So I think having all three of those individuals on calls are important. We always strive to get all the individual and the product sponsor as well. So having all those individuals up front and having them have this project be prioritized, so you may have to get out your salesmanship skills and advertise your platform and why it's important before you even begin. Then other challenges we see, I think, are, security and compliance again. Sometimes with the database, I don't know how many customers this is relevant to now, but if it's a little bit of a free-for-all now, if their databases is not managed by the platform. And so when you bring a database into the platform, it may involve taking away some permissions or access, elevated access they maybe had before. You may want to stop requiring drops or delete statements. And so if that's something developers in the past could do, there's sometimes some tension there. They'll think that that's maybe in direct conflict with their happiness, but you can maybe convince them of why it's important. We also have seen teams start requiring rollbacks, so that may be some extra work for developers to have to learn to script that. And again, some just some new new skills that are having to be picked up. And that's again with like this cultural mind shift. So that's another challenge. The whole organization needs to get brought on board. And so this is a new discipline. Like you said, it's only been in recent years it's come around. There's going to be new policies in place. So your users all need to have a say, but they also need to know that this is an important transformation that's occurring. So I think that's where we usually end up with, once the work itself is not as hard as the change management perhaps that's going into the whole project when we're starting out.
I love that build it and they will come. It reminds me of an old cartoon I saw one time that said, you start developing and I'll go get the requirements. And I feel like that fits in nicely here. And I also like what you said about the elevated access to developers. It's always like, you're taking something away from me, but it could also be like, if we remove your access, then you're not responsible for the management of the database, or if something goes wrong, you don't have access. So we don't have to come around and say, did you do this kind of thing if you had access. So I think there's again, it is that mindset shift that you mentioned. That last point I think is also very key.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on then. So Amy, you've obviously been in customer success for quite a while now, and I'm sure that myself and others on the call would love to hear some of the success stories that you've seen. We've talked about the challenges, and we've talked about kind of some of the pitfalls, that folks can fall into. But what are some of the success stories? Give us some hope here.
Okay, sure. That's my favorite topic, being in customer success. So one of my favorites is that I've seen customers implement one-click solutions, including the database into their pipeline. So with these one-click solutions, you'll get database creation. Your permissions are created on the fly, and then you can bring in with Liquibase, you could bring in your in-flight changes and get your database up to this current state of development that you need it to be at. You also, as part of that, you may be automating your source code repos, and providing a best practice repository structure. And so everything's just in there in place from day one. So with one click, so I've seen that before, and that's really slick. I'm always love customers that do the one click kind of setup. Other things we've seen that have gone very well and allow onboarding to be very quick is when you incorporate your database deployments into an issue tracking system. So from whatever system you're using for ticketing, once that approval happens, you trigger that deployment. Using Liquibase in the back end, your developers maybe don't even know that Liquibase is being used in the background because it's so smooth. All they do is approve something, you maybe do a code review, approve something, and then it goes. So that push button solution, similar to the one click, but from the ticketing system. We have seen that before, and that's been, highly successful. You can bring on a lot of developers that way too. And then I think one of the projects too, I'm very proud of to have witnessed was, I had a customer bring on hundreds of developers over the period of a weekend for their cutover. The platform engineering team POC'd the tool. They proved that it could be used for all the compliance they needed and their security requirements. We did UAT testing with all the developers, and we told them, we said, developers, bring us your most complex scenarios, anything you're concerned about, whether this will work with the tool, bring that to a UAT session. And they did. They learned that this tool would satisfy their needs as well. And then we just did the cutover on the weekend, and hundreds of developers started using the tool, on day 0. So that was pretty fun to have been a part of. So I was very appreciative of that customer.
Wow, that's very impressive, and I like how you brought it back to engaging and including the development team, and especially in that last scenario where you talked about the customer bringing in the developers and saying, give us your most complex. Usually we try and stay away from the edge cases, right? It's the 80-20 rule. It's like, no, we'll get to that later. And so the fact that customer said, no, bring it in, we're including the developers, and we want your complex scenarios so that we can prove to you that the tool is going to work. That probably had a big impact, wouldn't you say?
I think so. I mean, I think that's part of that, alleviating the concerns of the developers. They can be like, yeah, this is simple if you're creating a table, but what about if I need to, optimize these index, whatever it is. If you can prove to them and relieve their concerns ahead of time, before just saying, you're going to start using this tool, I think that's really, really nice. So.
Right. Yeah. Voluntold was the term I heard recently, which is great. Back to that internal developer platform, and I have to keep looking because I keep forgetting this 3-letter abbreviation. There's so many of them, it's hard to keep them all the same. So this internal developer platform, as you said earlier, it's kind of the linchpin, kind of everything that kind of ties everything together. And an organization has decided to try platform engineering. Should they build it or buy one?
So I'm not familiar with all the off-the-shelf platform engineering products. So, I haven't seen all of them. So I would think this question comes down to resources. For a platform or your IDP, it's a product. So you need to know individuals. You need to have individuals that know how to build it. So if you don't have engineers familiar with all the different technologies, you probably want to bring in either external tools or external services. Having that product manager, I think if you don't have a product manager to gather the requirements like we were talking about earlier, you may want a product that you purchase that kind of gives you a path for building those requirements and something like that. So I think it really comes down to the maturity of your organization and whether or not you want to build or buy. For the individual tools themselves, I think, one nice thing about a platform team, if you have one, is that team seems to be responsible for monitoring the industry trends and the technology. So those individuals are the ones that, ideally should know the best in breed tools and all the solutions that are out there. So, if it's just a matter of whether or not you build or buy a certain tool within your platform, again, I think that might be some things to consider. You just, for those tools you're buying or purchasing, if you are, just having that team know what's out there and available and the scalability and things like that of those individual products.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's the classic build versus buy argument. Just a slight plug here for Liquibase, of course, being a best in breed tool to do for your database change management, wouldn't you say?
I think so. We may be biased, but I think
That's
so.
true. We might be biased on this call,
But
but that's okay. All right, I think we've got one final poll question for our audience today. Once again, thank you for your for your an engagement today. We really do appreciate it. So, which phase best aligns with your organization's platform engineering maturity? Have you not started? All the way down to optimize. So if you're not started, or perhaps you're just provisional, so you're just starting to get things in place. Operational would be, yeah, we're not where we want to be, but at least we've got some things running. Scalable would obviously be we're beyond operational and we're actually moving to the optimized phase, which is we are in platform engineering nirvana at this point. So would love to get to the participation. So thank you for everybody who's participating. Looks like right now, actually, we've got some folks that are operational, which is great. So that means that you're not at the beginning, but then you're not where you want to be. What do you think about those results, Amy?
I'm very impressed. Operational is, highly high. Actually, thought higher than I thought it was being, seeing how new this industry kind of is. So I'm impressed with the poll. We have some of those that are not started, but probably while you're there, it's about to be starting if you're probably watching this podcast, so or webinar. So, let's see what else we have: provisional, scalable, optimized. Optimized too is great.
That's very impressive. Very congratulations to those teams that are optimized. You're probably the envy of the rest of the group. So that kind of ties in. That question ties into my final question that I had for us today before we get to the demonstration, which is, do you think that there is a golden path that you would recommend for organizations to implement database change management? That's really, of course, Liquibase's focus is really database change management. But oftentimes, we hear, I'm sure on the customer success side and certainly on the sales side, it's kind of like, well, how do we get started? It's like wrestling an elephant. Where do you start? So I'd love to hear from you about, based on your experience, is there a golden path for organizations?
I think so. I mean, especially if you're just getting started, like you said, you probably do want to purchase tools. Liquibase supports 60 plus databases. Your data developers are going to have so many different needs when it comes to the database. You have your SQL, your NoSQL. You have all sizes of databases, all your big databases, Snowflake, Big Data, Dynamo. So you need a tool that can scale with your organizations, and your teams can scale if they need to move into using a different database, maybe. So if they can have standardization where they know how database deployments work, and it's the same for all the different types of databases, I think that's, part of your golden path is just that standardization. They don't have to learn new things. There's some of that, mindset shifting and things like that. So I think one thing you do want to worry about is to try not to overwhelm your developers with too many decisions. I think there's a term I've read about called click ops, where you're just giving too many options to everyone, and they're like, oh my goodness. And so you want to find best practices and build that into the platform. So with Liquibase, we have a changelog structure. It's highly customizable. So what we advise to teams when they're starting out is provide a golden, a path that actually works, a proven path. Put that in there, so when they use it from day one, you have this change set structure that works for them. But it's flexible. So if there are teams that have been using the tool for a while, they can modify it and change it. And so it suits their own needs. So provide flexibility, but also like a starting point for teams that need to start using something they're not maybe familiar with. I'd say also make sure you're using your observability tools. So, you really should be holding a retrospective or a postmortem anytime there's a database, an outage, especially around the database. Figure out what caused it, and then put, guardrails around it to catch it next time. We have policies you can put in place that will, catch these things so they don't happen again if they do occur. And then, speaking of these policies and these checks, your DBAs are already familiar with what you should be checking for in terms of, good database code. So interview those database people, if they have compliance things that they're checking for when they do code reviews, build those into your policies, catch them up front, make sure your developers now have that, that benefit of the DBA who maybe was always doing that in the background. If a developer handed a DBA script, maybe they fixed it and they said, oh, I'm going to do it this, before they actually even ran the script. That we see that a lot. Build that kind of expertise into your policies so that developers, get notified as far left as possible and can understand that, oh, this is the best practice for writing these scripts. And so I think the last thing is probably just, listen to your developers. This whole platform engineering is around developer happiness, and, listen to what they want and find out their needs, and then make sure you follow through with what they've said, whenever possible.
Awesome. Yeah, good. That's a great great observations there. I do have one bonus question I do want to ask you, Amy, if that's okay. Is there a good ratio of platform engineers to developers? Because I could see that being something that it's like, okay, we want to get started. Well, how many platform engineers do we need given our team size?
I've heard that the industry standard is about 1 to 10. So 1 platform engineer to 10 app developers or end users. So that seems to be kind of the ratio we're seeing. And I think that's actually even true at like Liquibase. So
awesome. Okay, great. Well, I think that was the last question that I had for you, Amy. So if you want to sit tight, I'm actually going to start sharing my screen because I do have a short demonstration that I want to share with everybody. Let me find all of the appropriate windows that I need to share. I think it's just these two here. Let me make sure. Okay. And Amy, if you could let me know that if you can see my GitHub Action window, and if you could see my Visual Studio Code window.
yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Those are the two windows I'm going to be switching back and forth between. So in my scenario here, I'm going to pretend that I'm a brand new developer. That may actually not be too far from the truth, but I'm going to say I am a brand new developer and I need to have a database provisioned for me so I can test some changes. Now, perhaps my team uses Terraform and they've got the database, but that snapshot may not include everything that I need to actually start developing. Snapshots can actually get stale fairly quickly, especially if there's a lot of developers and there's a lot of changes in flight. So I need to bring my database, make my database operational for me. And so in order to do that, I'm actually going to go ahead and run a workflow. Now I'm using GitHub Actions, but this would apply to really any automation tool or any platform. And I'm going to go ahead and run my workflow. And what this is going to do is this is going to actually use Liquibase on the back end to actually deploy the outstanding changes that are pending in order to get my base database up to where it needs to be so that actually I can actually start developing and testing the code that I'm about to write. Now, as I said in this example, I'm using GitHub Actions, which is actually just invoking our Docker container to actually deploy these code changes. Now, you're probably seeing a bunch of things scrolling by very quickly. One of the things I'll point out here is that we're taking advantage of some Liquibase functionality called a workflow. And a workflow allows you to standardize your database deployments. So it doesn't matter who is actually running it, or it doesn't matter what database I'm going against. If I'm deploying to SQL Server or if I'm deploying to Snowflake, we can actually use the same workflow file. And so Liquibase will enforce these standards and make it consistent across your environment. Now, it looks like my job has finished. But one of the key points that Amy mentioned earlier was about developer happiness and the ability to self-serve. And so if I wanted to actually take a look at that and see what was actually deployed, I can actually pull up this operational report that Liquibase Pro has created that will tell me exactly what was deployed to this particular database. Had there been any issues, they would have shown up here. And if I scroll down a little bit here, I can get some operational information, but I can also see exactly what SQL was actually executed as part of this change. So as a developer, I don't have to bug a DBA or even a platform engineer to say, hey, what was deployed as part of this? I can actually self-serve and figure this out myself. So it looks like my deployment was completed successfully. So that's great. So now I'm actually ready to actually deploy my changes. So I can see here that since I'm a brand new developer, there's only a couple of things that I want to do here. I want to modify a table, and then I want to add some seed data to that table. So very simple changes that I need to do. I've already checked this into my source code repository. And so now I want to go ahead and deploy those changes. So I'm actually going to go ahead and run my same workflow again, but this time I'm going to tell it that I actually want you to deploy the changes that I've already checked into my source code repository. And I'm going to go ahead and execute that same workflow. It's important to note that it is the exact same Liquibase workflow behind the scenes. So even though I'm telling it that I want to deploy different changes, by using a Liquibase workflow, I'm actually ensuring that my database deployments are done in a consistent way every time. Now, I am using a self-hosted runner, as you can probably see here, so my little laptop might be struggling a little bit under all of this load, so please bear with me while my job runs here. Let me just check to make sure that my runner is still active. Yeah, it looks like it's still active. Hopefully it will run. If not, then what we can do is I can actually pull up a run that I did yesterday. So while I was testing. And so one of the things that Liquibase actually can do is it can actually, I can actually self-serve using Liquibase to actually see if I've got any problems in my code. And once again, I don't have to wait for somebody to tell me why something has failed. In this case, you'll notice that Liquibase is telling me that my SQL has failed. And it's given me the exact error that is the problem. And if I go back to my code here, I realize that I have a typo. I have called the table business units when actually the name of the table is business unit. And therefore, that is the reason why that my job has failed. And let me go see if my real job today has failed. No, I think there's a problem with my runner, so I'm just going to move on. So as a developer, once again, I can self-serve. I don't have to wait for somebody to review my code, or I don't have to necessarily dig through log files. I can actually pull up another operational report to understand exactly why my code fails, and then I can self-serve and I can fix it myself. Now, the final thing I'd like to cover with us today is something that Amy mentioned earlier, which is about observability and how important observability is to the not just the developer experience, but the overall organizational experience as well. And using Liquibase's structured logging, we can bring this visibility to your database deployments. Now, we've built kind of a showcase, a dashboard here that is highlighting many things. As you can see, we can see how many deployments that we're actually doing across all of our environments. So we've got dev, test, stage, and production here. We've also got a success and a failure rate, as you can see here. So what's the percentage of our deployments, our database deployments, that are actually succeeding and actually failing? But what may be of more interest to a developer is I can actually create a separate dashboard for each application. So if I'm a developer working on this application, I can actually track exactly what is going on with my database deployments as it relates to my specific application. You can see here that I've got a list of the change sets and when they were last deployed and to which environment. And you can see that some changes have not quite made it to production yet, and other changes have. We can see a heat map of where we're actually doing most of our deployments. And in this particular application, you can see that we're deploying mostly to Oracle and Mongo, but we've also got some Snowflake here as well. And so these dashboards can be surfaced to anyone in the organization that needs this kind of information. So once again, everybody who needs this information can actually self-serve, get this information themselves without having to ask someone, how many database deployments have we done? How many have failed? etc. And so this is a way that you can bring that kind of visibility into your database deployments. That was the final scenario that I wanted to cover. So I think we're ready for some Q&A. So I'll kick it back over to Shay.
Wonderful, James. Thank you so much for a great demo and great conversation before. Really, really appreciate that. Just as a reminder, if you do have a question, go ahead and submit that in the Q&A tab, and we'll get to a few in our last 5 minutes here. Okay, so our first question, does Liquibase integrate with GitLab to include database changes and package with app change releases?
Amy, you want to take that, or you want me to
I
take
can
it?
take that. So you saw James's demo with GitHub. You were doing James, and but GitLab would be very similar. So yes, it does integrate with GitLab. Sort of the same functionality you saw in James's demo. You can accomplish that with GitLab. And in terms of packaging that with your app code, yes. So I think I talked about changelog structures and how configurable they are. Those changelogs can live alongside your app code. So you can put the database scripts inside the same repo as your app code, or they can also live in an external repo, however you want to configure that. But so when you're doing your app deployment, you can also simultaneously deploy your database changes too. So those, in fact, that's the best practice. We recommend delivering your database changes along step with your app code.
And just to piggyback on that, we do have a public GitHub repo where we have working examples of Liquibase Pro running inside 8 different automation tools, including GitHub Actions as well as GitLab. So you can find that available, or we can share a link in our webinar.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, let's see. How do I get Docker copy of Liquibase?
So we have an official container out on Docker Hub. So if you just go to Docker Hub and you search for Liquibase, it's slash Liquibase is how you would find it. And so you can easily pull that down and then utilize our Docker container. You can also build your own too. Many of our customers will do that if you have other things that you need in there, or other libraries, for example, or extensions. You could build your own, but if you want to use our official one, it's available on Docker Hub.
Thanks, James. Okay, how compatible is Liquibase with Neo4j database?
Amy, do you want to take this one, or I can take it?
I haven't used, I know it, we support it, and I know we have actually some developers in-house that use it. I don't have a lot of specifics around it, if you have any more specifics, but I do know it's supported.
It is supported, and I actually have a demo that I have done in the past for using Liquibase with Neo4j. So I believe that some of our more advanced capabilities may not be available for Neo4j, but certainly deploying and tracking changes, using our policy checks, using our observability, using our workflows, all of that would be supported with Neo4j.
Wonderful, thank you. You mentioned workflows. Someone is asking, does Liquibase workflows, is it available for the non-paid version, the open source?
It is not. The policy checks and the workflows and some of the other advanced capabilities that we've talked about today are only available with our Pro version.
Got it, thank you. Okay, is there a list of DBMS types, SQL, non-SQL graph, documented time series that Liquibase supports and is compatible with?
There is, yes. All of that information is available on our website.
Wonderful. Okay, we have time for one more question. Does Liquibase support disaster recovery, example, recreating databases?
I can take that one. If you start using Liquibase, let's say you're using a brand new database, you'll have your entire change log, so that if you need to rebuild that those databases, you can with the change log, or you can, if you're using Liquibase on an existing database, you can take a snapshot of the database and have that in, and then as part, and then start adding changes on top of that. So we do have disaster recovery for the object structures. For the data itself, you probably need to be doing snapshots with however you're doing those backups today.
Wonderful, thank you. Oh goodness, we've got a lot of questions coming in at the end. Let's see, let's get to a couple more if we can. What's the best way to link database change sets and API deployments together when they exist in different repos? Single database repo that's used by multiple APIs. Is that something you should trigger from another system like the IDP, Jira, Snow, etc.?
I think so. I think that's where your platform comes in and being able to trigger multiple repos. I know some CI/CD tools do allow you to run code from external repos, not just the one you're within. But usually, I think that's a good case for platform engineering and being able to have like a lot of flexibility around which repo you're running and things like that, instead of just some of the standard tools that are generally just triggering from one repo.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, let's do one more. How does Liquibase databases manage data consistency and transactions, and what potential pitfalls should be considered in distributed environments?
For data consistency, so Liquibase does deploy data, and you can put policies around it. So we actually just came out with a little even more in-depth policy checks that are based on Python scripting. So essentially now you can put a lot of standardization around how data statements need to be formatted. And then we do also have the ability to run in transactions and things like that. So if a statement does fail, we can roll it back for a lot of different database types. So I think just making sure you have proper rollback in place if necessary, putting in the policies to make sure the database is you can also, I think this is maybe where the platform comes in. There are tools that are checking for PII, things like that. If you want to use other tools like that, in addition to Liquibase, you can run them against the same repo. So with Liquibase, all your SQL is in one repo. And so, once it's there, you can have, some of these other PII, et cetera, tools running against it as well. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is officially the last question, but if we cannot answer it live today, we will be following up with you over the next day or so. So we will answer it, just not necessarily here live. Let's see. Is there a Git repo with examples using, is it PY Liquibase, Pi Liquibase? Not sure. We can follow up on that one.
Well, we may have to follow up on that.
Okay. All right. Well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you all so much for just such great discussion, Amy and James, a great demo and great participation from our audience with our polls and some awesome questions. We will reach out to you directly if we were not able to answer your question live today. What's a good next step? We suggest getting a custom demo. This is where you can talk specifically with a Liquibase expert, referencing your specific tech stack, your unique pain points that you're trying to solve. It's just a great next step. So you can use the QR code or the link right there to get that scheduled. And that's all the time we have for today. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.
Bye, everyone.